You could do everything right, reply on time, compliment him, make plans, be supportive, ask how his day was, be available when he calls, try to fit into his world, try to become everything he ever said he wanted. But none of that guarantees his heart, because men don't measure love by how much you do. They feel it through the depth of how you affect them. It's not in how many boxes you tick, it's in whether you leave a mark on his soul. Effort says, look at how hard I'm trying, but impact says, you'll never forget how I made you feel. There are women who do everything and still get left, and then there's the woman who doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't bend herself, and yet he can't stop thinking about her. Why? Because her presence wasn't just convenient, it was transformational. She didn't win him with tasks, she touched something deeper, a part of him even he hadn't accessed. She made him question how he ever settled for surface-level connections. She didn't overwhelm him with attention, she made him feel seen in his stillness. Her silence spoke louder than approval. Her standards made him want to rise, not retreat. She didn't force chemistry, she created space for energy. When she entered the room, she didn't ask for it to shift, it just did. And that's when he knew. She wasn't another name in his inbox. She was a feeling he couldn't describe but craved to experience again. Impact isn't loud, it's not about posting the right photo or sending the perfect text. It's about the woman who walks in truth so fiercely that even when she says nothing, he remembers everything. It's not in grand gestures. It's in her energy, it's in how she holds herself when he's distant, in how she doesn't fill awkward space with noise, in how she doesn't need to be chosen to know she's worthy, and suddenly he starts to notice. He begins to feel unsure, not of her, but of himself. He wonders if he's enough, if he's rising to the moment. He starts thinking about what losing her would feel like, not just what keeping her might take. Man tests not with words, but with silence. When he pulls back, it's not always punishment, it's a pattern. He's watching how you move when he stops moving toward you. He's paying attention to how you treat yourself when he stops treating you like a priority. Will you chase? Will you shrink? Will you beg for breadcrumbs and call it connection? Or will you remain rooted in your power, refusing to audition for a role you already know you're qualified for? His silence is not an accident. It's a signal, and whether you answer it with anxiety or with alignment determines everything. Praise is easy. Anyone can compliment a man's looks, his success, his style, his charm. It's surface-level validation, temporary, forgettable, even manipulative at times. But to truly see a man, that's rare, that's intimate, that's disarming. When a woman sees beyond the curated version he shows the world, when she notices the tension he hides in his jaw, the hesitation in his voice, the weight he carries without words, he doesn't just feel admired. He feels understood, and that feeling changes everything, because men aren't starving for applause, they're starving for acceptance without performance. He's used to being noticed for what he does. The woman who captures his soul is the one who recognizes who he is when he's not trying. She sees the man behind the mask. She sees the struggle he doesn't speak of, the dreams he downplays, the pressure he denies. She doesn't just tell him, "You're amazing." She reflects back to him the parts he thought no one noticed. She says, "I see how hard you try when you don't think anyone is watching. I noticed the way you listened even when you were tired. I felt the way you stayed silent when you could have defended yourself just to keep peace. Those words go deeper than flattery, they heal." She doesn't feed his ego, she nourishes his spirit, and that makes her unforgettable. Because when a man feels truly seen, he lets his guard down, not because he's weak, but because she made him feel safe enough to be real. She didn't love the version of him that was polished, she loved the version that was honest. The messy, the vulnerable, the unsure. And in that space, he found something he didn't know he was searching for, not just love, but belonging. Man tests not with words, but with silence. He'll get quiet just to see if your attention comes from anxiety or authenticity. He'll step back, not because he wants distance, but because he wants clarity. He wants to see who you are when his energy isn't there to orbit around. Will you crumble when his focus shifts? Will you question your worth when he stops validating it? Or will you stay steady, grounded, calm in your knowing? Because in his silence, your truth is revealed, and it's not your effort that speaks the loudest, it's your energy when he goes still. Real confidence isn't about who commands the most attention in a crowded room. It's not the woman with the loudest laugh, the flashiest look, or the most charming words. It's not how much she talks, how often she posts, or how quickly she replies. True confidence is subtle, it's elegant. It doesn't need to announce itself. It's the kind of energy that lingers long after you've walked away. She leaves the conversation, but her presence echoes. He still thinks about how she looked him in the eyes, not to impress, but to connect. He remembers how she listened, how she didn't try too hard to be liked, how she smiled with self-assurance, not to please, but to express. She wasn't performing. She wasn't rushing to prove her value. She didn't ask, "Do you want me?" because she already knew she was wanted by life itself. That kind of woman doesn't need to compete. She's in a league of her own, and when she's not there, something shifts. He notices the absence not just because she's gone, but because something real is missing. The conversations feel flatter, the energy feels duller. No amount of noise from others can recreate the peace she brought with her silence. She's not worried about being forgotten, because women like her haunt, not in a dramatic way, but in that quiet ache that says, she had something different, and now it's gone. You see, confidence is unapologetic stillness. It's the kind of stillness that says, I trust what flows away wasn't meant to stay. It's the woman who doesn't beg for closure, because she creates it within herself. It's not how she shows up when everything is going right, it's how she holds herself when things go silent, unclear, or unfinished. Man tests not with words, but with silence. He disappears, not to hurt you, but to watch what you do with the space he leaves behind. Do you panic? Do you chase? Do you shrink your boundaries in hopes he'll return faster? Or do you sit in the silence with calm, certain strength, unafraid of what leaves, because you know nothing truly aligned can be taken from you? His silence isn't just distance, it's a doorway, and how you walk through it tells him everything he needs to know about the woman you really are. Before she ever asks for effort, she becomes the standard. Before she ever speaks about respect, she embodies it. She doesn't need to say, "This is how I want to be loved," because her energy already teaches him. You see, when a woman walks in self-worth, she doesn't tolerate confusion disguised as chemistry. She doesn't mistake attention for affection. She doesn't trade her peace just to keep someone else comfortable, and that alone tells a man everything about what's allowed and what's earned. He may not even realize it at first, but something about her makes him step differently. He becomes more intentional, more careful with his words, not out of fear, but out of reverence, because the way she carries herself says, I know who I am, I know what I offer, I know what I won't accept. She doesn't teach him through lectures or ultimatums, she teaches him through her consistency, her grace, her calm no, when something doesn't feel right, and slowly she shapes the emotional climate of the relationship. If she's clear, the space feels safe. If she's peaceful, he shows up with more presence. If she's whole on her own, he doesn't feel pressure. He feels privilege, because a man can sense when he's in the presence of a woman who doesn't need him but chooses him from a place of fullness. That energy doesn't create games, it creates gravity, and he either rises to meet her or quietly removes himself from a space he knows he can't play small in. She doesn't get bitter when someone falls short because she never tries to fix, chase, or convince. Her worth isn't a negotiation, and that confidence creates an environment where only truth can survive. Man tests not with words, but with silence. He pulls back to feel what fills the space when he's gone. Does she lose herself trying to win him back? Does she beg for clarity he refuses to give? Or does she stay soft yet steady, calm but unmoved, sending the unspoken message, if your absence creates more peace than your presence, I will not fight to keep you? That's when he realizes he's not just testing her, he's learning whether he's ready to meet a woman who sets the emotional tone and won't lower it for anyone. You've been told that men are afraid of vulnerability. But the truth is, they're not afraid to feel, they're afraid to feel unsafe while doing it. They're afraid to let their guard down, only to be judged. They're afraid to show weakness, only to have it used against them later. They're afraid to tell the truth of who they are, because too often someone tried to rewrite them instead of understand them. So when a man finds a woman who gives him space to breathe emotionally, without trying to mold him, fix him, or pressure him, he doesn't just like her. He gravitates toward her because what he's chasing isn't control, it's relief. He doesn't want to feel managed, he wants to feel met. He wants to be able to say, I'm not okay, and not have her make it about her. He wants to be able to pause, reflect, and come back without being tripped into constant reassurance. He wants to be heard, not handled. He wants to feel trusted with freedom, not kept on a leash of expectations. And when a woman gives him that space, when she creates connection without clinginess, when she respects his boundaries without making them personal, when she doesn't assume the worst just because he needs a moment, he breathes easier. Not because she's passive, but because her power is rooted in security, not control. She doesn't micromanage the pace of the connection. She allows him to lead, but only if he leads in love. She doesn't demand vulnerability. She makes it welcome. That's the difference. That's what sets her apart, because men don't run from deep women. They run from emotional pressure masquerading as depth. But when a man feels that he can be masculine and messy, strong and scared, present and imperfect with no fear of being punished for it, he'll keep coming back, because safety doesn't cage him, it calls him home. Man tests not with words but with silence. He steps away not to punish but to observe. He watches if her calm turns to chaos when he's no longer immediately accessible. He listens for how loudly her insecurity speaks when his attention isn't constant. Will she lash out? Will she chase validation? Will she threaten to leave before giving herself a moment to breathe? Or will she hold space without pressure? Will she allow the stillness without making assumptions? Will she trust that what is meant to stay doesn't need to be strangled into staying? In that silence, he sees who she truly is, not just the version she shows when things are flowing, but the woman she becomes when she isn't in control. There's a kind of love that suffocates, and then there's the kind that invites you to breathe deeper. A woman who needs a man to validate her, complete her, or fill some inner void will always feel heavy in his life. Not because she lacks love to give, but because she's holding out a cup with a hole in the bottom, asking him to pour endlessly just to keep her afloat. That kind of need isn't intimacy. It's dependency dressed up in devotion. And whether he says it out loud or not, he feels it. It drains him, it pressures him, it makes him the oxygen mask in her world, and no man falls in love with a woman he feels obligated to rescue, but desire. That's different. Desire says, I want you not because I'm incomplete, but because I see something powerful in us together. She chooses him not from fear of loneliness, but from abundance of self-worth. She could be alone and still feel whole, but when she's with him, it's because she truly wants to be, and that energy, it makes him feel chosen, not trapped. It inspires him, not drains him. It awakens something in him that says, this woman doesn't rely on me to make her life meaningful, but somehow being with her makes mine more meaningful. The woman who is desired doesn't chase, beg, or prove. She lets her peace do the talking. She stands in her truth so solidly that his presence feels invited, not required. She doesn't manipulate moments to test his love. She doesn't cling in fear when he gets quiet. Because she knows, if love must be held by force, it isn't love, it's fear pretending to be connection, and men sense that difference instantly. They know when they're being called into a partnership and when they're being pulled into a rescue mission. They lean into the woman who desires them with openness, not pressure, because she's not looking for someone to save her, she's looking for someone to build with her, and that is magnetic in a way desperation never can be. Man tests not with words, but with silence. He'll disappear just long enough to see how deeply she depends on his presence to feel secure. He wants to see if she collapses when he pulls away, if her identity fades when he's no longer feeding it. Will she try to fill the silence with panic? Will she punish him with neediness? Or will she continue on in quiet power, unafraid, unshaken, and still complete? In that space, he learns whether she truly desires him or just the idea of what he gives her. And the woman who passes that test doesn't just keep his attention, she earns his respect. She's not the loudest in the room. She doesn't chase approval with overexposure. She doesn't try to be everywhere, noticed by everyone, begging for validation with every glance or scroll. She doesn't perform, she exists, and that alone is enough. While others are trying to be seen, she's busy seeing herself, her worth, her energy, her essence, all intact with or without an audience. She doesn't lower herself into competition because she knows the moment you start competing, you're already admitting someone else's standard matters more than your own. She doesn't ask, "Am I enough for him?" She stands in the truth. Is he aligned with the woman I already am? And that shift in energy, that quiet self-assurance, it hits different because it's not rooted in ego. It's rooted in emotional clarity. She doesn't try to win him with over-effort. She doesn't need to outshine another woman. She simply owns her lane and lets her energy speak volumes. She doesn't post to prove. She doesn't speak to be loud. She speaks to be true. And when she walks into a room, she doesn't need eyes on her to feel seen. She's already acknowledged herself before anyone else had the chance. That level of inner validation is rare, and men feel it. It makes him slow down. It makes him check himself. It makes him ask, "Am I showing up in a way that a woman like her would welcome?" Because respect isn't demanded. It's drawn out of people by how deeply you respect yourself, and her certainty isn't about being right. It's about being rooted. She doesn't panic when his attention shifts. She doesn't spiral when his interest flickers. Because her value was never based on whether he sees it. It was built long before he arrived. She doesn't need drama to be relevant. She doesn't need to prove she's the best. She simply is. And in a world addicted to noise, her quiet confidence is deafening. Man tests not with words, but with silence. He won't always tell you what he's feeling, but he'll create space to watch how you respond when he stops feeding you attention. Do you panic and try harder? Do you mold yourself into who you think he wants, or do you remain still in your power, knowing that your worth doesn't evaporate just because someone goes quiet? In his silence, he's listening to your energy. And the woman who doesn't compete for space but stands tall in her lane, certain and calm, she doesn't just pass the test. She sets the standard. The biggest misunderstanding about men and love is the belief that they fear commitment. But commitment isn't what scares them. Losing their freedom is. Not freedom to cheat, roam, or detach, but the freedom to breathe, to be themselves, to feel unjudged, to stay connected without feeling controlled. When a man meets a woman who gives him space within love, not distance masked as independence, he doesn't run from her. He runs toward her, because deep down every man is asking, will I still feel like myself inside this? Will I be able to speak freely, move freely, think freely? Without feeling like I'm walking on emotional eggshells, men don't crave chaos. They crave peace with purpose. Not an emotional prison wrapped in affection, but a connection that lets him expand, not shrink. She doesn't cage his masculinity. She doesn't ask him to choose between his life and hers. She lets the bond grow without choking it into permanence. And that's the paradox. The more freedom a man feels within the connection, the more loyal he becomes to it. Because he doesn't feel like he's giving up something, he feels like he's gaining everything. He feels honored, not owned. He feels welcomed, not watched. He feels trusted, not tracked. And that kind of freedom, that kind of spacious love, makes him crave her in ways no pressure ever could. She doesn't question where he's going because she's so grounded in who she is. He naturally wants to come back to her. She doesn't suffocate his independence, she amplifies it, with a kind of feminine strength that says, I don't need to hold on tight to keep what's real. And he respects that, because that space she gives him isn't distance, it's devotion without desperation. It's the kind of connection that says, be yourself, be free, and if you still choose me, it'll mean even more. A man tests not with words, but with silence. He creates space not always to pull away, but to feel if the connection tightens or breathes when he steps back. Does she trust the bond, or does she start clinging in panic? Does she give him room to reflect, or does she smother it with questions? He's testing not your patience, but your presence in absence. Can she hold the connection lightly, without letting it go? That's when he realizes she's not here to trap him. She's here to walk beside him, and that's a kind of freedom he never wants to lose. There's a lie many women have been sold, that the more you show up, the more he'll show up for you. That constant availability equals devotion. That answering every message, accepting every plan, and saying yes to everything he needs will somehow convince him you're worth choosing. But here's the truth. Being everywhere all the time doesn't build value, it builds expectation. And eventually, what was once effort turns into background noise. Your constant presence becomes something he assumes, not something he appreciates. But the woman who knows her time is sacred, the one who guards her energy like it's gold. She's not always available, because she's not always supposed to be. She doesn't exist to fill someone's emotional gaps. She shows up when it's right, not when it's expected. She doesn't disappear, but she also doesn't feel obligated to prove her loyalty by abandoning herself. And when she's with him, she's not distracted, she's not pretending, she's not halfway there. She's present, fully, authentically, intentionally, and that presence is what makes her unforgettable, because there's a big difference between being constantly around and being genuinely invested. Men don't fall for convenience, they fall for connection, and true connection isn't about time spent, it's about energy shared. He remembers the woman who was emotionally available, not endlessly accessible. He remembers the quality of her presence, not the quantity of her replies. He remembers how seen he felt in her eyes, how grounded he felt in her calm, how when she gave him her attention, it wasn't out of duty, it was out of desire. She wasn't reacting, she was choosing, and that choice made all the difference. Because when you know your value, you don't try to impress with how fast you show up. You let the moment invite you. You save your full energy for spaces that are ready to hold it. And when he earns your attention, he feels it like sunlight after shadow, rare, real, and radiant. Man tests not with words, but with silence. He goes quiet not to ghost, but to gauge, to see whether your availability was a strategy or a reflection of true alignment. He's watching to see if you rush to fill the silence out of fear, or if you pause, breathe, and wait, confident enough in the bond that you don't need to constantly perform to keep it alive. He's not just testing your patience, he's testing your presence without pressure. And the woman who isn't always available, but always intentional when she's the one who stays in his mind long after the noise fades. She doesn't lecture him on potential. She doesn't nag him to grow. She doesn't mold herself into his needs, hoping he'll one day do the same. She simply rises in her own light, and in doing so, she awakens something dormant in him, something that makes him want to meet her on that level. Not because she told him to, but because her presence makes anything less feel uncomfortable. She holds herself to a standard that isn't about ego, it's about alignment. She has goals, values, emotional intelligence. She's not here to be impressed by words. She watches for action. She doesn't need fixing, and she's not looking for a project to fix. She's not perfect, but she's whole. And when a man experiences that kind of woman, he doesn't feel judged. He feels inspired. He doesn't feel like he's under pressure. He feels challenged in the best way, because she doesn't lower her standards to make him comfortable. She doesn't shrink her light so he can feel big. She shines, and trusts that the right man will rise, not retreat. And the right man doesn't resent that he respects it. She speaks her truth even when it's uncomfortable. She walks away from games even when she wants to stay. She honors herself in the silence even when her heart is screaming for reassurance. She's not afraid to be misunderstood because she understands herself, and in her clarity he finds something he rarely experiences: accountability wrapped in love. She doesn't guilt him into growth. She inspires him with her example. Just by being around her, he begins to think bigger, love deeper, show up stronger, because she becomes a mirror not of who he is, but of who he could be if he stopped holding back. And that's the magic of her presence. She doesn't change for him, and yet, somehow, he changes because of her. Man tests not with words, but with silence. He steps back, not always to disconnect, but to feel if her power is conditional or constant. Will she bend her boundaries to keep his interest? Will she soften her strength to appear less intimidating? Or will she remain who she is, even in the face of his distance? In that space, he realizes, she's not here to beg or prove. She's here to be met, and the man who wants to stand beside her will rise with pride, not resentment. Yes, her beauty might draw his eye. Her presence might stop him in his tracks. Her smile might make his heart skip. But beauty alone doesn't anchor a man's soul. Because in a world where physical attraction is everywhere, what stays isn't what's seen, it's what's felt. And the woman who makes him feel alive, safe, respected, inspired, that's the woman he builds with. That's the one he holds close long after the first spark fades. It's not about how she looks in a photo, it's about how he feels in her presence. She doesn't just flatter his ego, she elevates his essence. She doesn't just adore his image, she connects with his inner world. Around her he feels understood without needing to explain. He feels strong, but not because she strokes his pride. He feels strong because her energy reflects his highest self back to him. She speaks life into the parts of him that others overlook. She challenges him without shaming him. She sees his effort, not just his achievements. And when he fails, she doesn't shrink his worth. She reminds him of who he is underneath the doubt. With her, he doesn't feel like a provider. He feels like a partner. He doesn't feel like he's being tolerated. He feels valued. He's not performing for her approval. He's unfolding into his truth. She doesn't try to be better than him. She believes in the better inside of him. And that belief is rare. That belief changes things, because when a man feels like a king in your presence, not because you bow to him, but because you honor yourself, he doesn't want to lose that mirror. He doesn't want to lose the version of himself he becomes when he's around you. That's why he stays, not because of the way you look when you walk into the room, but because of the way you make him feel seen, respected, and called into more. He feels like the man he wants to be when he's next to you, and that's a kind of beauty no filter, no figure, no face can compete with. Man tests not with words, but with silence. He goes quiet not just to see if you'll wait, but to see if the connection stays real when the noise disappears. He wants to know, do you still reflect the same strength when he steps away? Do you still radiate the same warmth when he's no longer feeding your worth with words? He's watching how you hold your power, even when he's not around to validate it. And when he sees that the woman who made him feel like a king doesn't need him to feel like a queen, that's when he understands she was never chasing love, she was calling it forward.